Hello friends, today we are going to study about the cardiovascular system. Cardiovascular system includes heart and blood vessels. Heart pumps the blood into the blood vessel and the blood vessel circulates the blood throughout the body. Blood transports the nutrient and oxygen to the tissues and removes the carbon dioxide and waste products from the tissue. So here we are going to study about the heart. What is an heart? Heart is a muscular organ. Heart is a muscular organ that pumps blood throughout the circulatory system. Heart is situated in between two lungs in mediastinum. So remember the word mediastinum. It is situated between the two lungs in mediastinum. It is made up of 4 chambers, that is 2 atria and 2 ventricles. Basically, the 4 chambers of the heart is divided into first the right side of the heart and second the left side of the heart. The right side constitute right atrium and right ventricle. Similarly, the left side constitutes, that is, left atrium and left ventricle. So we will be studying each chamber of the heart separately. So now we are talking about the right atrium. Basically, right atrium is a thin-walled and low-pressure chamber. Right atrium has the pacemaker known as sinoatrial node. Sinoatrial node that produces the cardiac impulse. And it also constitutes atrioventricular node that conducts the impulse to the ventricle. Atrioventricular node that conducts impulse to ventricle. Right atrium receives the venous or deoxygenated blood, or you can also say it as an impure blood, via 2 large veins, that is superior vena cava that returns venous blood from head, neck and upper limb, and second is the inferior vena cava that returns venous blood from lower parts of the body, that is lower limb and the trunk region of the body. Oil, that is the between right atrium communicates with the right ventricle, or you can also say between the right atrium and right ventricle there is a tricuspid valve. Coming next to right ventricle. The wall of right ventricle is thick and venous blood from right atrium enters the right ventricle through tricuspid valve. From the right ventricle, pulmonary artery arises. From the right ventricle, pulmonary artery arises. It carries the venous blood from right ventricle to the lungs. Pulmonary artery carries the venous blood from right ventricle to lung. And in the lung, the deoxygenated blood is oxygenated. Let us discuss about the left side of heart. Left side of the heart consists of first the left atrium. Left atrium is thin-walled and also a low pressure chamber. It receives the oxygenated blood. From lungs through pulmonary vein. Pulmonary vein is the only exception in the body where the arterial or oxygenated blood is carried by vein. Blood from left atrium enters the left ventricle through mitral valve, or also called as bicuspid valve. Wall of the left ventricle. Wall of the left ventricle is very thick, and left ventricle pumps the arterial blood to the different part of the body through systemic aorta. So we have seen the description of the 4 different chambers of the heart. So let's see this in the diagram. So this is the diagram of the heart. First point, the 4 different chambers of the heart. This is the right side of the heart. This is the left side of the heart. This is right atrium. This is right ventricle. This is the left ventricle. This is the left atrium, and this is left ventricle. Between the right atrium and right ventricle is the tricuspid valve, and between the left atrium and left ventricle is the bicuspid valve, which is also called as mitral valve. In the right atrium opens the superior vena cava and inferior vena cava, which drains the deoxygenated blood in the right atrium. From the right atrium, the deoxygenated blood moves to the right ventricle, and from the right ventricle, the blood moves to the lung through pulmonary artery. That is, this is the pulmonary artery. This is pulmonary artery, which divides into right pulmonary artery and left pulmonary. This is also the only exception in the body which where an artery is carrying the deoxygenated blood. This pulmonary artery is guarded by a pulmonary valve, that is the semilunar valve. So this is the left atrium. The left atrium receives the oxygenated blood through pulmonary vein from lung, and from the left atrium it moves to the left ventricle, and from the left ventricle the oxygenated blood pumped to different part of the body through systemic aorta. This is the aorta is also guarded by the aortic valve, which is also called as the semilunar valve. This is the overview of the structure of the heart. And so next let us see the septa of the heart. Right atrium and the left atrium are separated from one another by a fibrous septum called as interatrial septum. मतलब राइट एट्रियम और लेफ्ट एट्रियम के बीच में जो वॉल होगा, फाइब्रस वॉल होगा, उसको हम इंटर एट्रियल सेप्टम बोलते हैं. एंड सिमिलरली बिटवीन द राइट वेंट्रिकल एंड लेफ्ट वेंट्रिकल are separated from one another by interventricular septum. मतलब इन दोनों के बीच में जो सेपरेशन है उनको इंटरवेंट्रिकुलर सेप्टम बोलते हैं. द अपर पार्ट ऑफ दिस सेप्टम इज अ मेम्ब्रेनस स्ट्रक्चर, वेयर एज द लोअर पार्ट ऑफ दिस स्ट्रक्चर इज मस्कुलर इन नेचर. यहाँ पर जो अपर पार्ट है ये मेम्ब्रेनस स्ट्रक्चर होता है, सिमिलरली जो लोअर पार्ट होता है वो मस्कुलर होता है. Now talking about the layers of wall of heart. हार्ट में कितने लेयर्स होते हैं? हार्ट इज मेड अप ऑफ 3 layers of tissues. 3 layers of tissues होते हैं. फर्स्ट इज द outer, second is the middle, and third is the inner. Outer is called as pericardium. Middle is called myocardium, and inner is called endocardium. Outer covering of the heart, that is the pericardium, is made up of again 2 layers, that is outer and inner. Outer is known as parietal pericardium and inner is called as visceral pericardium. And the space between the 2 layers is called as pericardial cavity, and it contains a thin film of fluid. The space between these 2 layers, the space between the parietal and the visceral layer, the space between the parietal and visceral pericardium is called as pericardial cavity. And this space is filled with a thin layer of fluid. Outer parietal pericardium forms the strong protective sac for the heart. It also helps to anchor the heart within the mediastinum. It is made up of 2 layers, outer fibrous layer and inner serous layer. Outer parietal pericardium. Outer parietal pericardium forms the strong protective sac for the heart. It helps to anchor the heart within the mediastinum. It is made up of two layers, that is outer fibrous layer and inner serous layer. The fibrous layer forms the thick fibrous layer is formed by a thick fibrous connective tissue, and it is attached to the diaphragm below, and it is continuous with the tunica adventitia of blood vessel entering and leaving the heart. Because of the fibrous nature, it protects the heart from overstretching. And serous layer is formed by mesothelium together with a small amount of connective tissue. So outer fibrous layer is formed by a thick fibrous connective tissue, and it is attached to the diaphragm below and continues with the tunica adventitia of the blood vessels entering and leaving the heart. Because of the fibrous nature, it protects the heart from overstretching. Inner serous layer is formed by mesothelium and small amount of connective tissue. Mesothelium contains a squamous epithelial cell which secretes a small amount of fluid which lines the pericardial space. This fluid prevents the friction and allows the free movement of heart within the pericardium when it contracts and relaxes. Pericardium. Inner visceral pericardium, it lines the surface of myocardium, made up of flattened epithelial cell, and this layer is also known as epicardium. Inner visceral pericardium is also known as epicardium. इसके बाद हम पढ़ेंगे second, that is the myocardium, that is the middle layer of the wall of the heart, that is the myocardium. So let's study the myocardium. Myocardium is the middle layer of wall of heart, as we have already seen above, and formed of cardiac muscle fiber. It is formed of cardiac muscle fiber or cardiac myocyte. You can also say it as a cardiac myocyte. It forms the bulk of heart. Actually, the myocardium forms the bulk of heart, and it is responsible for the pumping action of the heart. It is responsible for the pumping action of the heart. So cardiac muscle, and what is the characteristic feature of the cardiac muscle? Cardiac muscles are involuntary in nature. Talking about the myocardium has three types of muscle fiber. First, that is muscle fiber which forms contractile unit of heart. Second, muscle fiber which form pacemaker. And third is the muscle fiber which form conducting system. Next is the endocardium. That is the innermost layer of the heart. Endocardium is the innermost layer of the heart, and it is a thin, smooth and glistening membrane formed of single layer of endothelial cell. Single layer of endothelial cell lining the inner surface of the heart. Endocardium also continues as endothelium of blood vessel. So this was all about the layers of the walls of the heart, that is outer pericardium, middle myocardium and inner endocardium. Now, there are 4 valves in human heart. 2 valves are in between atria and ventricle and are called as atrioventricular valves. Atrioventricular valve. 2 atrioventricular valves are there, that is left atrioventricular valve and right atrioventricular valve. Left atrioventricular valve is also known as mitral valve or bicuspid valve. We have seen in the diagram, and it is called as bicuspid valve because it is formed of 2 valvular cusps. 2 valvular cusps or flaps. Similarly, right atrioventricular valve is known as tricuspid valve. It is between the right atria and right ventricle, and it is called as tricuspid valve because there are 3 valvular cusps are there. The brim of atrioventricular valve is attached to atrioventricular ring and ventricles. The other 2 valves are semilunar valves placed at the opening of blood vessel arising from the ventricles, namely the systemic aorta and pulmonary artery. Valve of heart permits the flow of blood through heart in only one direction. What is the significance of the valve is it allows the flow of blood in only one direction and it prevents the backflow of blood. All for the today. In the next video we will be covering the properties of the cardiac muscle. So thank you so much for watching my video, and if you like my video then please like, subscribe and share my video, and if you have any doubts or then you can ask me in the comment section. Thank you so much.